Outside the notes. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Outside Notes. This week on the show, we're going to be looking at an archetype that hasn't really been talked about that much, and that is the 3, 4, maybe even 5 color deck. So the first thing that you might ask yourself is, how do I get into this deck? Usually it's because you open up something really powerful that you want to play, like an Ultimatum. In my mind, Ruinous, Eerie, and Brilliant Ultimatums are the 3 best ones and the ones that are really worth going for, or any other super powerful gold card. Additionally, you may have found yourself base green. You have a lot of good green cards with some mana fixing. The foundation for this entire deck is the mana fixing that's available in this format, and there is a ton of it. Look at this, just in the non-green, the colorless type of mana fixing, you can get the full cycle of gain lands. These are the tap lands that gain you a life. Those are in the packs. You can get Evolving Wilds, which is also another common in the packs. Farfinder, which I love. The whole cycle of the crystals at uncommon that add one of 3 colors of mana and also ramp you up, and also have cycling if you don't need it. And the full cycle of Triumphs, which also tap for any one of 3 colors of mana and also cycle if you don't need them. And if you're in green, you get even more fixing. You get Migratory Greathorn. You get Migration Path, which is an uncommon, but again, it has cycling if you don't need it at the time. And when you do, it double fixes and double ramps. And you get access to Fertilid, which is a little bit on the slow side, but again, it's another great way to get multiple lands out of your library and onto the battlefield. So most of the decks that I found success with in the 4 color and occasionally 5 color range will be based in green because of all that great mana fixing. Now here's the big twist though for Ikoria. It's not just about having a lot of great fixing, it's the cyclers too. The addition of a whole bunch of 1 mana cyclers is critical here, because what it means is that you can put cards into your deck that you might be able to cast if you have the mana, but if you don't have the color of mana for it, you can just cycle them away. And this is massive. It completely changes how these decks actually play out, because in a normal scenario, you're stuck with what's in your hand. And if you decided to go for 4 colors and you drew one of the cards you don't have the color from, you're just stuck and you might lose the game because of it. Now, so many of them have cycling. It means you can get rid of the card you can't cast and then increase your chances of casting the other cards in your hand, because cycling can find you the mana that you need to cast everything. So the setup is definitely here. Lots of powerful gold cards that incentivize you to want to play a bunch of colors, tons of fixing, and even a great backstop of having the cycling cards to protect you in the case that you can't cast them. Now, here's some things to consider if you do decide to go for the deck. First and foremost, your mana curve in this deck is different than it plays out in a normal deck. Different than? What do you want me to say? From? All right, I guess it's from. Most limited decks put a high priority on curving out with creatures, which is what you should be doing in most mid-range style limited decks. But this deck's different. You want to focus the early part of the game on getting your mana set up, and then you want to skip the middle part where you're casting, like, say, 4 mana creatures, 3, maybe a few 5s. You want fewer number of cards in that space and then more on the other end. So think 6, 7, 8 and more mana. So you actually want to kind of polarize. Your mana curve. Now, one thing that will pop up for you though is that early removal and interaction with your opponent's creatures is extra important in decks like this. If you get the time to set up your mana, you're very likely to win, because your cards are going to be way more powerful than the average cards from the opponent. The problem is, if they curve out with creatures and kill you before you can get your mana set up, well, you're going to lose a lot. So one of the cards to keep in mind is Deadweight. Deadweight is a card that's actually worse in this format than it has been prior, but this deck will play mostly as many as they can get, because it almost ensures that you get to try to stay alive longer against an early curve out. Another card is Boot Nipper. Now, I know that this doesn't count as removal, but I did say interaction, and sometimes that means getting small defensive creatures on the battlefield early. And Boot Nipper's probably the best one in the set at that. It can have lifelink if it's just going to trade anyway, or it can have Death Touch to be relevant later in the game or to trade off for something bigger. Those are huge attributes for a deck like this. Now, another one that you're going to want to look at here are card draw spells. In ramp decks, they're very important. And that's because, especially with cycling being so prevalent, these decks can be very prone to flooding out. And one of the best ways to use those lands is to draw more cards and overwhelm your opponent with card advantage. Cards like Dark Bargain, Of One Mind, even Parcel Beast, which I know isn't a card draw spell, but it's like a card draw engine. These go up in value a lot, and Boon of the Wishgiver's really nice. The other thing to keep in mind as a tip for playing these decks is that normally powerful cards that need to be cast on a very specific turn, or you really want them down in a specific time, they go down in value because you're playing a lot of tap lands. A lot of the time you're ramping out rather than developing your board, and these cards, you may not have the mana to cast them when you need to. Cards like Thieving Otter, all combat tricks, you just don't want any index like this at all. Even cards like Momentum Rumbler or Spite Dragon that you really want to get down the turn, turn 4 Momentum Rumbler, so much better than turn 8 Momentum Rumbler. Getting a Sprite Dragon down on turn 2 is right where you want to be, and it's too hard index like this, so you devalue those, even though they're normally pretty powerful. Now, one more tip about these decks, there's actually a really cool Reanimator sub-theme. We don't get this very often in Limited, where you get to kind of do a real Reanimator thing, and you do in this set. This lets you bring back huge creatures from the graveyard for a reduced cost and at no detriment to you. This, of course, is because of cycling. Cycling allows you, under some circumstances, to put very large creatures in the graveyard for a relatively small amount of mana and have them replaced in your hand so you get the card back too. Then, later on down the line, you can use a reanimation spell to bring that creature back on the battlefield and smash your opponent with it. It's awesome. Did I say brilliant before? I don't know what I said, but it is meant to be inspiring. So some of the cards to keep in mind, well, you need the big creatures to get in the yard. So Titanoth, Rex? Yeah, that works. Void Beckoner, Greatest Sandworm, and Sanctuary Smasher are some of the good options. There's other ways to get creatures in the yard as well. You can use cards like Skull Prophet or Excavation Mole to mill yourself to just put them into the graveyard. And you can even use value cards like Bushmeat Poacher, which is a good defensive card, or Mutual Destruction to get some value out of having put those creatures in the graveyard. And then, of course, you're going to need ways to get them back. Unbreakable Bond is the one that you'll see the most, but Back for More is probably the best one, at least the most powerful one. Eerie Ultimatum? Can I call that a reanimation spell? I think I will. So yeah, that's one of my favorite little sub-themes and some tips on how to draft this deck. But I thought we should bring in my friend and Magic Hall of Famer and world champion, William Huey Jensen, to talk about how these decks play out in a more broad perspective.
What's up, Suddy?
Huey, what's up, buddy? It's nice to see you. How are things going? Man. Looking good.
Thank you.
I like the hair, too. By the way.
Yeah, I don't, but here we are.
I've been talking with our friends here on Outside Notes, Huey, about drafting ramp decks in Limited. What are some of the considerations that you take into consideration when you start to draft one of these decks?
So certainly the biggest thing is the quality of the mana fixing. The best mana fixing are always cards where, when drawn, enable you to cast all your spells. A card like Fertile Ground, right? Those cards are few and far between, especially nowadays. Now, sort of the more fixing you can get, the better, and the more precise fixing. So what I mean now is like Fabled Passage, right? Mm-hmm. Fabled Passage in your deck is going to get you whatever you need in that moment. The best one is the one that can just always give you all your colors. Doesn't exist. Right. The next best one is one that can find all your colors. So there's the 4 mana search for two lands in this set, right? Cards like that are really, really strong because they give you what you need when you need them. Like if I'm playing a 4-color deck, a 5-color deck, I'm often playing like one more land than my deck wants in terms of land density, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is I just need it. Like I need to have 9 green, 6 blue, 4 red, 3 black, and 2 white. And if I don't play an 18th land, or some cases a 19th land, I just don't have enough of each color in my deck, right? The risk is when you're doubling what I just said with high-end cyclers, and your deck is already overly land dense, and then you start cycling your expensive spells, your deck is going to become even more land dense in the confines of that game. So these two strategies don't mesh. So I think in a cycling dense format, you just have to kind of bite the bullet, and you can't overplay lands because you can't put yourself in a position where you've cycled your deck into having you cycle 2 expensive cards. All of a sudden your deck has 19 land, 19 spells in it. You're almost sure to get flooded in that game.
When you think of ratios, what are some rough numbers that people could aim for say, number of fixing or ramp cards and number of payoffs that they would want?
So this is a complicated question to sort of give general rules for, as many things are in Magic. There are a few things that influence this. One, the more card draw you have, the more ramp you can play. If your deck has, let's say, 3 copies of Boon of the Wishgiver, you're allowed to play a little bit more land and you're allowed to play a little bit more ramp. Because all you need to do is have a turn where you're not going to die if you play Boon of the Wishgiver, fill up your hand, and then start chaining into others, and you have extra cards. So the value of drawing dead lands or redundant mana fixing is less harmful because you're just overpowering your opponent in card advantage. If your deck is built in a way like you're ramping, but what you're ramping into are just huge creatures that you want to play and attack with, you run a bigger risk there of your opponent just answering, you just go I throw my hand on the table. I go land, ramp, play my big creature, and then maybe all I have in my hand is the 3/3 that I didn't get to play on curve. All of a sudden, your opponent has 2 removal spells in their hand. They kill your big creature, and they have a removal spell for your next one. You kind of just can never win from there. Right. You don't have anything to get you back into it because your good cards, they're not the type of good cards that help in that circumstance. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So I always tried to veer towards the grindy ramp decks where I'm ramping up to something that I don't want to ramp up to a haymaker. I want to ramp into cards that are going to fill my hand. The fundamental problem with these decks are you have to play 17 lands in your deck usually because you need to be able to cast your ramp on curve. Mm-hmm. So then if you're playing 17 land, sometimes 18, plus 4 ramp spells, right? Your deck isn't dense enough in threats. You understand there, even if I'm getting to my 7th land on my 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever turn, I can cast all my spells, and those spells are really powerful. Still, even these big dragons, they can be dealt with. So what you need to do is you need to continue to push the advantage by actually being able to keep fighting. You're also going to be too reliant on drawing the big dragon. Imagine you have this 10 out of 10 super ultra dragon, or you can have, a couple 8s, but a Boon of the Wishgiver. You're going to play those 8s so much more often. I always value card draw high, but I think it's even better in these decks where you just throw all your cards into play and turn them into mana.
And then last thing, mana sinks. Places to put your mana after you have it that are on board or that are repeatable. Where do those fit into the equation for you?
Tremendously up in value because you have so much mana to sink. You might have access to 10 or 12 mana in the late game, and just having something to do with that mana turns what is a major downside to the deck into producing some value for you, so you should really be on the lookout for those.
Huey, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. I really appreciate it.
You got it, Suddy. Anytime.
We'll see you, buddy.
Take care.
Great stuff from Huey as always. We got to check out just a couple of highlights before I say goodbye for the day. First, our good friend James from Loading Ready Run does a little math.
Might as well play it a little safe. I think we're good, though. I think we've got this. Yeah, they're taking 8. No, they're taking...
Has a little baby Obosh here.
Actually, exactly enough damage.
Down to 6, but look at this. Springjaw Trap with a little baby Obosh on the battlefield is enough for 6 and lethal. Nice job, James. This one's just a straight 3-color deck from Ryan for over at Going Optimal.
I don't know.
And that, my friends, is how you do it. Ruinous Ultimatum. Yeah, sure. Have your honey mammoth. Enjoy it. Yeah. And I show you that kind of to remind you how powerful some of these top-end cards are and how worth it is to make the mana work. Ruinous Ultimatum. Cast it, you win. This last one, I don't even know what to say. What is he doing? Kind of classic Ben S, right? This is a guy famous for the Chipotle gif, and he's still at it drinking a lot of something from a very large, it looked like a hat or a helmet. I'm sure it was a bowl or something. So that's going to do it for this one here on Outside Notes. Hopefully the tips were helpful for you, and hopefully you're inspired to try to draft maybe a 4-color deck next time you sit down for Ikoria if it's open. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll see you next time. Thanks again for watching this episode of Outside Notes. Make sure you subscribe to our channels if you want to get updated on all the new content coming out. And you can use the hashtag Outside Notes to send any clips to me or even just for discussion about what we talked about in the video. We'll see you next time.